Akhetaten's Gates, Chapter 4. Darla gave a big smile as she set a box on the bed. I glanced up at her and at the white box. Today was the anniversary of the day they found me. Since I couldn't remember the day of my birth, they figured that day would substitute. Therefore, I was celebrating my 6th. Open it. What else could I do? What child didn't like presents? So I opened it, finding inside a lovely pink church dress. It came with cute little frilly socks, gloves, and even a little hat. I almost wondered if I'd look like a frosted cookie if I put myself in it. The reaction Darla portrayed almost made me wonder further. She was so happy and proud. I had been the sheer joy of her life since the moment I was named. Time was growing short, so I finished donning on the pretty princess pink attire. Darla applied children's makeup on me, consisting of flavored lip gloss and a little blush. But needless, or regardless, or what have you, I felt rather grown up indeed. To complete the ordeal, I picked up the matching purse, which was empty, as I had no money, nor needed any, and slung it over my shoulder. Darla, let's hunt for Easter eggs. I never called her by a motherly title, though she acted as such for me. But it never felt natural. I did care about them, and I appreciated them, but they were just not my parents. But despite that, despite how cold it sounded, we were all quite content with that. We were a family otherwise. Aurora, you know very well that the hunt is next Sunday. I don't even think they'd hide the eggs yet. They'd get all yucky or lost. Maybe God can forgive one egg? I insisted jokingly. She shook her head with a laugh. Keep talking like that and you can make an excellent politician. Maybe I'll rule the world someday, I teased dramatically. I'll sit on a golden throne in a kingdom on the sun. On the sun, eh? Now that's ambition if I've ever heard one. To that I had to beam proudly. She glanced at the clock. Well, speaking of guiding kingdoms on the sun, we'd better get going. We'll be late for church if we dally much longer. And as if on cue, the horn honked outside as Bernard tried to rush us along. He was always the first to be ready to go anywhere. He always complained about how long it took for Darla and myself to get ready. Darla often said that girls need to look pretty to make up for the men not looking pretty. She also joked that God made girls because otherwise, guys would rush through life too fast. I suppose I was just too young to realize what that meant at the time. It seems rather amusing to me now that I can really apply such jokes to my experiences. The preacher, Mr. Simon Brown, greeted every face and shook every hand that passed through the doors of his church. He did this every Sunday. And every Sunday, he would pat me on my head. I really hated it when he did that. This Sunday was no different. After the dreaded head pat, he crouched down and gave me his kind old man smile. Good morning, Aurora. My, that is a lovely dress. Did your mommy and daddy get that for you? He obviously didn't realize that Bernard and Darla were trying to cut him off with silent but clear motions. No, I replied rather simply. Darla and Bernard got it for me. It's a birthday present. I don't have a mommy and daddy. Oh, was the only reply he could muster. Rather wisely, he took it no further, but stood up with a shrug. My acting parents shrugged back at him. Well, it's a pretty dress anyway. You remind me of a cute little Pop-Tart. I was afraid of that, I muttered as I slunk past him and across the church to the classrooms in the back. Ah, the world of Sunday school. I never really enjoyed going, but it seemed to be the thing to do. I didn't really have anything better to do. Did I believe? To a point, yes, I did. But there was just something missing from the faith that everyone gave so blindly. I needed something personal. Now, I've heard those arguments. God blesses you by letting you wake up alive every day. That's a given. But waking up to a life that is rather empty and confusing isn't exactly something I feel blessed about. I needed an experience. And in truth, very few people truly experience the experience. It was hard to give my whole heart and soul to something or someone I felt no personal connection to. And it wasn't for my lack of trying. I suppose it was because people who enveloped their lives in science and discovery raised me. The Egyptologists who acted as my parents were big on facts and physical evidence. Theory and hypothesis were all placed on top of things that had some sort of solidity or possible validity available to them. Faith in a religious figure wasn't exactly that easy. The I have to see it to believe it lifestyle overflowed pretty much into all aspects of my existence. History books held more appeal to me than fairy tale books and Bibles. The connection, that personal connection that everyone claimed to have, but I surely doubt many had, was missing, and it isolated me from the settle and peace everyone was striving for. Miss Carey was already in the classroom, as were many of my classmates. She was a young lady, pretty, and generally cheerful. But perhaps, I wonder, if she was a little too naive and lacked the thing I had an abundance of: guts. I took my seat quietly as she began to hand out our picture Bibles. Well, how else would you get small children to pay attention to a book full of morality if it wasn't in the form of a comic book? "All right, children, let's settle down," she said in her sweet voice. It took several minutes for the request to be heard, processed, considered, and obeyed. She was so easily walked over. She held up a long painting, propping it up on the front table that served as her desk. The painting was a familiar one. It ought to be, with its fame. It was a painting of Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper, painted by none other than the infamous Leonardo da Vinci. Does anyone know what this is? A classmate, a rather outspoken boy named Jeremy, raised his hand. He didn't even bother to wait until his name was called before simply blurting out the answer. "Miss Carey, that's the Last Supper. My mom has that painting in her wall." "Very good, Jeremy. Does anyone know why it's called the Last Supper?" I raised my hand, lacking the enthusiasm of the other children. I was called, and I replied matter-of-factly, "It was the last meal Jesus and his disciples had together before his crucifixion." "Right," she smiled. "Does anyone know what it was Jesus was celebrating?" She called on Cindy this time. "Easter?" That got a few giggles. "Easter was when Jesus rose from the dead, you ninny," Jeremy spat. I merely smirked at him. Boys would be boys, I supposed. But that wasn't going to answer the question, so I boldly spoke out of line. "Passover." Miss Carey gave a nod. Yes, they were celebrating Passover. Afterwards, Jesus was arrested and put to the cross. He arose from the dead, and that was how we got Easter. Okay, that was a religious explanation. But how ironic that Easter also fell on another holiday, Easter, celebrated by pagans to give honor to the coming of spring and their fertility deities. But again, this was something I was not about to voice. I almost wanted to burst with the grand knowledge I seemed to hold over everyone else. But I had often been scolded for bragging such things. People didn't like a know-it-all, especially when from the lips of a child. "Miss Carey," Cindy began, "wasn't Passover something to do with Moses?" "Yes, it was," she replied. "Moses killed the Pharaoh on Passover before crossing the Red Sea, right?" Jeremy spoke up. "That's not how it happened," I shouted. "Aurora, calm down," Miss Carey suggested. "Let's hear what everyone thinks. Everyone is entitled to their opinion." "It doesn't make it right," I stated. "Bernard said that people think Exodus took place during the rule of Ramses the Great when he was younger. So how could Moses have killed him if it was discovered that he died when he was 90 years old and the cause of death was an infection? It makes no sense. The Bible makes him sound so evil, but no one understands how life was like back then." "He had Hebrew slaves," Cindy argued, as if that would justify everything. "Our country had African slaves. What's your point?" I demanded. "Do you think Americans are evil?" "Well, no." "Then shut up." "Children," Miss Carey said, with a little more force. "Let's calm down now." "What do you know?" Cindy continued to argue. "More than you," I retorted. Okay, so it wasn't the most mature of retorts. But I think for my age it was perfectly acceptable in an unacceptable way. Darla and Bernard study ancient Egypt for a living, so I'll believe their findings over some book about believing in things you can't see. Aurora, Miss Carey scolded. Pharaohs are stupid anyway, Jeremy said, waving us off. I suppose it was his way of trying to end the conversation, but it only fueled my frustrations. I ended up throwing my picture Bible at him. You're stupid! It was then that Miss Carey grabbed my arms and began to pull me from my seat. That would be quite enough of you, young lady. You're all stupid, I shouted. You don't know anything. I pouted as I sat on a bench in the hall. Darla and Bernard were in the room, talking to Miss Carey and Mr. Brown. The door was open, so I was able to hear every word. Whether this was their intention, I'll never really know for sure. I truly am sorry about all this, Darla insisted. We are partly to blame, I suppose. She's an Egyptian girl, and we're Egyptologists. We have pride in that part of history, and we thought, being of the country, she should have a lot of pride in her history as well. Perhaps we've just put so many facts and theories in her mind that she has missed the concept of faith. She is extremely stubborn and ornery, Miss Carey stated. She accepts no questioning of her beliefs and opinions. She is just a child who needs physical proof and historical facts that holds a deal of proof she can accept, Bernard explained. That's the making of a true scientist for you. She may grow up to do great things, but even still, she's only 6 years old. We've all had a stage in our lives when we were stubborn and ornery. It's just what children do. You can't expect people to just believe because you say so. Maybe one day she'll have that special experience that proves to her that God exists. Or not. We can't force her to believe something she doesn't. All we can do is offer her the information, opportunity, and patience. She'll figure out what makes her her own little person one day. I don't think it's healthy for a child to lack any faith or imagination. Excuse me? Bernard, Darla whispered, trying to interrupt before he became truly angry. She's fine. She has an imagination. She's just a very independent and individual child. She's not just another sheep. Every flock needs a leader, and I think she is just naturally the bold and leading type. If you're threatened by the intelligence of a mere child, I'm wondering just what you are trying to teach her. People like her have the potential to grow up, to be influential and important leaders, artists, and scientists. Something her mind will take away from that. She's a good girl, just opinionated. I wiped my eyes as the arguments continued in some fashion or other. I had been able to calm myself a little. Bernard's words filled me with a little bit of pride. But Miss Carey's accusations were painful. I was being punished for what I could manage as the most comfortable me I could be. I just liked to have something to hold on to. Was that so wrong? Was it possible that I just didn't belong to a church? I didn't understand. It actually made me feel rather sick. I felt like a real misfit, and I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel about that. After that day, I never returned to Sunday school. Shortly after that, we stopped going to church altogether. I really hadn't meant to isolate Darla and Bernard from the community they had grown up with. I actually started to question the validity of God. Was he real, or a figment of man's imagination? And if he was real, then why would he do such things to good people? This had put a strain on us and on the community. But with no obligations, Darla and Bernard began working harder to take up the time they now had. Mostly, our Sundays then became full of museum visits and zoos, but always with a lesson to come with it. That was the fate of being raised by intellectuals. But I never complained. Did I believe there was no God? I wasn't sure. I suppose one could say that I was still in the middle of my spiritual search for peace and complacency. I was waiting for my missing something.